Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim, and our guest today is Les. So Les, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
My name is Les Romhanyi. I'm up here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I'm here discussing my rather unusual business known as Pixelific Games. And fire away.
Awesome. So Pixelific Games, right? So I'm curious if you could just tell our audience what exactly that is and how you got the idea for it.
Basically, I've been making games to entertain my friends and family for about 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm not a young spring chicken by anyone's imagination. So being up here in Canada, we have limited access to lots of different things, and again, being up here in Canada, we're pretty much shut-ins for half a year. Winters are just not, unless you're going out and enjoying winter activities or you have to do so to get to work and stuff like that, you're just not going out and, sitting under the stars at night just because you can. I mean, you could, but you'll freeze your ass off in the process. So you're stuck indoors quite a bit, and might explain why there's a lot of Canadians in the entertainment industry or in sports and stuff like kind of disproportionate based upon the per capita here. It's because we're stranded indoors 6 months of the year. We got to entertain ourselves somehow. So my
Right.
escape was in gaming, and again, as such, we don't have a lot of. Again, you got to think back 40 years. We didn't have access to a lot of things. Like we didn't just have random companies who would make game components or would cater to gaming companies to make boxes and all of that kind of stuff. You're kind of, you had to go south of the border to try to get that hooked up. And it's really difficult for Canadians to establish themselves back then in terms of, setting up businesses and stuff like that. Now, if you think back again, you're probably too young, but I'm sure you've heard of the game Trivial Pursuit.
Yes.
It's a pretty well, that was made by, Bored Canadian. And when they first put that product together, their interests were geared towards Canadian trivia and things of that nature, which clearly is not of much of an interest to an American audience.
Right.
So again, limited population back then, all of that kind of stuff. They managed to connect with an American game manufacturer who told them straight up, you got to make this interesting for Americans. So they'd spent 5-6 months putting together all these questions that would be more appealing to Americans, and well, the rest is history. It took off like crazy, but it's that difficult. You if you're trying to capture the American market with American corporations, you have to gear the interest to the American people. And, sometimes that's just not possible because you're making something that's not, geographically located to target any audience. It's much more of a global thing. So anyways, it was very expensive back in the day to create and market board games because let's face it, that's what they were. That's what they sold was board games. So, you'd have to spend a small fortune. I mean, just to make a mold for one piece in your board game, it's about $20,000 at that time, and that's just for one. Let's say you had multiple pieces, it starts becoming very, very expensive. And of course, you would have to make a minimum order of 1,000 copies of whatever it is you're trying to sell, right? It's not like today where you've got print on demand everything, It's so much easier today. So anyways, long story short, I was making all these prototypes and playing games and entertaining friends and family and all that kind of stuff with them. And one day I was watching a television show called Big Bang Theory. I'm sure you've heard of it. very popular here in Canada at the time. And they had this one episode where some of the main characters they bought a 3D printer. And the thought immediately jumped into my mind, hey, that's not a bad idea. That saves a lot of problems, you know? I can go out and hire someone to make a mold for me for $500 instead of 20,000. Well, that opened a lot of doors. So that's what I did. I went out and I made a mold, and I thought to myself, okay, well, now that the manufacturing's so much more easier and more streamlined, why not? Why not start making some of these products? And I had this one. Well, I shouldn't say had. I have this one game that my friends and family have been playing for pretty much 40 years on a regular basis. And I thought to myself, well, I should probably get some intellectual property coverage on that. So my goal was to secure a trademark for that particular product. And in doing so, or in that pursuit, I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to go through the trouble of getting a trademark, why not include electronic version computer games? So that's what I did, and I sought out a way to make that happen because, as I'm sure you're probably aware, programming's not cheap. It can get kind of expensive. So, anyways, the game company came about because I had a partner at that particular time, and I told him what I wanted to do. And he asked me, well, what would you call your company if you had one? And I went online and I thought, well, I want to include the word pixel, right? And thinking about the computer version or the online gaming aspect of it. And so I just did a bunch of searching online to see what domain I could get that included the word pixel. So I went through a whole list of different pixel things and discovered that pixelific.com and dot everything was available. And I thought, okay, well that's very fitting, Pixel terrific, pixelific, blah blah blah. So I secured the domain names, and well, the person that I was working with for all of this, he set up a corporation right away. And not just a local corporation. He went and did a federal incorporation. I'm not sure. You guys are in the States. I'm assuming you're what, Texas or something?
Yeah, I'm in Texas. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So up here you've got a choice. You can do provincial corporations or you can do federal corporations.
Right.
Whereas, you're protected provincially if you do a provincial corporation. But if you do a federal one, then you're protected federally. So he set up a federal corporation for this. And then I discovered the British Columbia Institute's ISSP program, which stands for Industry Sponsored Student Projects. And again, well, you got to be in the industry. So I thought, okay, well, that's perfect timing. We've got this federally incorporated company now, so let's utilize that. And so I submitted my proposal, and a team of students, 4 students, picked it up. Very difficult to get a project selected by the students in this program. Less than 50% of submissions get selected. Now, obviously, they're young people. Young people like games, so it was a natural, easy selection. They chose to work on this project. So that covered my basis for securing a U.S. trademark with respect to board games and electronic games. So I was, once the electronic version was done, I was set to apply. So I applied and secured that trademark. Took a little while. Took more than a year or so because it was a made up word. It was that much easier because it's really hard for someone to challenge a made up word. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that word was Taox, Taoex. Basically, a bastardization on the word Tao or Taoism, which loosely translated Taoism is basically the way, right? A way of doing things. And it was very fitting to this particular game that I had. I spent years trying to decide on a name for this game, right? I wanted it to be a one-word product, like chess or checkers, Uno, rummy,
Right.
something to that effect. But it's really hard to just get that one word name. And when I first created this game back in the 80s, early 80s. I thought to myself, well, it's based on six, so let's call it Hex. Perfect, right? Well, guess what? There's a game called Hex already, owned by Milton Bradley. Did you ever see the movie It's a Beautiful Mind? Russell
Yes.
Crowe?
Yes.
Okay, so you know the game that he invented playing on the floor in the bathroom in the little trapezoid or whatever the
Yeah,
shape
yeah.
is? Well, that's the game of Hex. That's what it's actually called, is Hex, Hex. So I couldn't call it Hex. Then I thought to myself, damn it, let's call it HEXX, thinking this is great. It's not the same, but it's similar. And then the internet came along and someone created a electronic version of the game Hex and called it HEXX. So I'm like, oh great, I can't call it that now, can I?
Right.
Right. So I spent years trying to figure out what the hell to call it. The brainstorm came to me one day while I was out for a walk, and let's call it Dowx, and then that just became Daux itself, right? And anyways, so we successfully secured that trademark, and now we've got this federally incorporated gaming company, and of course the company was never put together as a money making venture. It was done strictly to secure the trademark. So now I've got this gaming company. I've got all these board games that I created, over 40 years, and I thought to myself, all right, well, let's use the company as a repository for all this intellectual property. And I went back to BCIT and their ISSP program, and I submitted more games for different groups to work on and make. And in the process, I wound up mentoring, I think around 36 or more students in computer game design and development, which was good. It was fun, and it was relatively inexpensive if you do a comparative analysis on all of that nonsense about how much it costs to do this, that, and the other within that scope. And of course, these were all just computer-based games. So the program works like this, and I don't know if you had a chance to visit the link I sent you about the ISSP, but lots of companies have taken advantage of this system. One of which is, this is a fairly popular website, Plenty of Fish. I'm
Right.
sure you've heard of that one, right?
Yes.
Well, I'm not. I mean, they've got them listed as doing a game for them, but earlier on, I believe they created and made a lot of the Plenty of Fish system, right? That we know of as the dating system that was there. So they've had lots of corporations submitting projects into the system, and what's interesting about this particular system is for $500 you get a team of students working on the project they select. Hopefully, it's one of yours on the project that they select, and it works out to be about the equivalent of about 400 hours of development time with these students. Which, if you applied just I'm not saying Fiverr prices, right?
Right.
Fiverr.com, but if you applied even an average computer programming hourly wage, 400 hours. Well, that's not cheap, you know.
Right.
So I kept going back and submitting projects into the system, all game based, and played around with that for a couple of years with these students, and that's how I did so many projects with them. At one time, and of course, this is all done over a semester of their education, right? It's part of their education process of, like finding out what it's like to work in the real world, because ideally they're students who might not have had a job in their chosen field before. So at one time, whenever I submit projects, I'd always submit, 2, 3, 4. Well, one semester I had 4 projects selected by 4 different teams. So it almost became a full-time job for 3 months going there, and because you have to meet with the students online or in person and help them and figure stuff out. So I did that like I say, for a couple of years and did a bunch of projects. And again, the goal wasn't to be making any of these things as a business venture, right? Because when I had these students program these games, monetization wasn't even a factor. Didn't even think about it.
Right.
And if you're building computer games, monetization has to be the first consideration, not the last. Okay? And I've had over the few years since then, I've had multiple, and I get them constantly. I've had multiple platforms that are want me to convert my games into their systems to utilize their monetization system. And I'm like, well, there's no room for monetization on any of these because I didn't plan for monetization, right? Whether that's in-game ads or, or whatever. Again, because that wasn't the goal. The original goal was to secure a trademark for that particular class of trademark. And then after that, it was just fun for me to work with all these students and take these old board games of mine and turn them into online games. And it just came like, okay, well, we've got this for the web, so now let's make this one. Let's take this web application and turn it into an actual app, right? But it has to be cross-platform compatible. So the web program had to work with an Android and an Apple app, right? So it just became all these little fun projects to work with on the students, and it was just, excuse me, just a way of giving back to that community more than anything else. So, excuse me, I now have a federally incorporated game company that I'm not really doing anything with. So as far as success, yeah, I successfully created and all these games and mentored all these students. That was a success. But as far as a viable business, well, I haven't put it into that direction. And it's really hard to justify spending a lot of money promoting products that have no return on the investment built into them, right? So there's been little incentive for me to market them, put the word out, try to do stuff with them. I don't have shelf ready products. Well, I do for one, and that's the main one, the Daux game. And that just became again part of the, hey, this is kind of cool. Let's experiment with this. And I made 100 copies of that particular game by hand. Took a while, right? Because each of those games has 78 pieces. So, you do the math, that's 7,800 individual pieces that have to be made. So I'd taken the 3D products that I used to make molds, and then I just sat there and made 7,800 pieces to go with these copies. And it was a lot of fun and all that kind of stuff. And we actually did start thinking to ourselves, okay, well, let's go and start going to conventions and all of these fairs and stuff and start promoting this thing and trying to get it out there. And then COVID hit. You couldn't go to these places, right?
Right.
They were all shut down. No in-person meetings or activities and stuff. I mean, I was going to send all of these copies out for free to all these gaming clubs around the world and stuff. Here, try this out, check this out, right? But they couldn't host gaming conventions and things of that nature either. So COVID really took the wind out of our sails at that particular point in time, and we really haven't done much activity since then. The trademark that I had secured came to its anniversary date. After 6 years, you have to resubmit your trademark to show that the mark is still being used in commerce. And originally, I secured a U.S. trademark all on my own, right? No lawyers, no nothing. Just did all of the work and did all of that stuff and secured it. And then I went to go and resubmit to keep it active. And that's when I found out the lobbyists in America convinced the trademark office or the Library of Congress, if you will, that if you're not an American citizen and you want an American trademark patent or whatever, you had to retain an American law firm to do this. So I could no
Right.
longer do it on my own. And knowing that 2 more years after that 6 year anniversary, you have to do that all over again. And I just thought to myself, well, I'm not spending thousands of dollars to do something I can do on my own. And so I got notified just last month that I've abandoned my U.S. trademark, which, it's not a big deal because I can go and get a Canadian trademark and submit that all on my own and do that. And again, having an American trademark, it only protected the name in America. It doesn't protect you everywhere around the world, other than you're waving an American flag, which may give other countries pause, but it certainly doesn't give China pause.
Right, yeah, for
You know what
sure.
I mean?
Definitely not China.
Anyways,
So,
you got any questions? Yeah?
yeah, yeah. So I think that was a really good explanation. We're just about almost out of time here,
Yep,
but yeah, I guess like just to wrap it up, I mean, obviously you have a cool story, and I appreciate you sharing all of that.
sure.
If somebody wanted to use your games or wanted to get in contact with you, what's the best way for them to find you?
Well, they could just go to pixelificgames.com. There's
Awesome.
contact form there. And I just want to point out again too, to any of your listeners out there who have an idea for something and they're just kind of inhibited by the cost of promoting or producing something in the electronic version, that the British Columbia Institute of Technology industry sponsored students projects is not relegated to just Canadians. It's any You could be from anywhere in the world and submit a project. The only caveat is you have to meet with the students regularly. Now, it can be on over Zoom, it can be phone calls, it doesn't have to be in person. You just have to use their system to submit your application to
Right.
try to entice a team of students to take on your project. And again, that $500, that's Canadian. That's
Yeah.
monopoly money. So from American perspective, that's like what, 40% discounted.
Right,
You
right.
know,
Yeah, exactly.
that's a night out on a good date to get
Exactly.
that kind of. So BCIT. That's probably bcit.ca. I can't think of the domain off the top, but it's definitely worth looking into it. And they don't just do programming; they'll do all kinds like database development. They'll do web development, games. Again, it's got to be interesting for the students to choose your project over someone else's, but it's
Right.
definitely something to look into. As long as you got a company and you're willing to take the chance on that student program, depending upon how large that project is, you may have to go and resubmit over the next semester to get it finished because it depends how big it is, right? But it's a really
Awesome.
good system and it's worth checking out if any of your listeners were looking at something like that.
Amazing. Well,
Hint,
Les,
hint,
yeah,
go with the game submission.
exactly. Yeah, it's a great
Yeah,
way to, save money and work with some great students. So, Les, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
not a
And
problem.
yeah, and if anybody is interested, I'm definitely, check out Les's website or reach out to the British Columbia School. And yeah, thanks again for your time.
Not a problem. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. All
All
right.
right.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye now.